Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Notes series on D&D's Tomb of Annihilation, which is a fun romp both through a jungle and a dungeon that is an homage to the classic Tomb of Horrors. If you're coming back to this video series, I appreciate you so much for being a follower. And if you're new to the series, let me just explain. This is not a blow-by-blow or a let's play or an actual play of the campaign. What this is I go through and recap my sessions with my players to kind of help explain how to run the adventure, and then also give my thoughts and notes as being as a DM and D&D rules, notes, and things like that in general. So with no further ado, let's dig right in. I always like to do viewer feedback, then I do rules comments, and then after that we dig into the actual adventure recap itself. But I also I'm going to put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback and or rules clarification. And I also want to give a shout out to, and I'm going to get this wrong, so I apologize in advance, but Kiaran Inglay. I hope that's how it's spelled, and that name will be listed in the credits at the end of the video. Kiaran Inglay is the newest Patreon supporter for these videos. As I mentioned before, people keep asking me to do these videos. It's hard for me to find the time, so I've said if we can, if you guys want to support by Patreon, if I can get to $25 a month, then I dedicate to doing at least one a month, and then there's higher ranks and stuff like that. And I'm sure I'll talk about the Patreon again during the video, and then there's a link just look in the show notes. There'll be a link for that. I try not to talk about it too much because my main goal in this isn't to make a lot of money, but I do get a lot of feedback. People are like, hey, will you do more of these? Very helpful. And it's very hard for me to find the time to do it frequently, even though I love to do them. So there we go. Enough said on that right now. So let's go to the viewer feedback from number 7, which was several months back to speak to my point. But Troy Burnham said, thanks for a full response in this video. It's very helpful. Well, I always try to. When people leave viewer feedback, I like to address it. And I think when I address that viewer feedback, it can help other people that are watching or listening as well. Sometimes people will post and say, hey, Shane doesn't start the actual recap until X time, and that's fine if you just want to jump to the recap. But I personally feel that there's a lot of good information throughout the video for DMs and players and that sort of thing. So, okay. And he went on to say, Strahd was a 3-year-long campaign because the group is just my friends and family, and most of us are college students, so we only play during summer and winter breaks. That's fine. My campaigns have been averaging a couple of years, even with, trying to do weekly. Because, we for whatever reason, we play 2 hours at a time. And so it's more of a weekly thing rather than, like when you're younger and you're like, oh, let's play 8 hours today, which is great. It's just hard to do these days. Okay. White Rhino said Buster took over. And yep, if you watched last video, you may remember that as I was recording the video, my cat climbed all over me and I just kept plowing through. So they're good old Buster. So all right. Tony said, love the meme, love the video. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to stay out of breath weapon range? I agree we should avoid these notes videos if we're part of the campaign. Yeah, if whether you're part of my group or another group, if you're a player and you're in Tomb of Annihilation, I think it's best if you don't watch these until you're done. Because even if you're like, oh, I'm just going to watch this part, and we're already way off there, I might talk about stuff that's coming up in the campaign. So I think the respectful thing to do, not just for your DM, but for the other players in the group with you, so it's a spontaneous experience, is not to watch these if you're currently a player in this campaign. Tony said, we finished the campaign as you started yours. I'm running Out of the Abyss right now. Very different experience being a player compared to being the DM. Yep, that's true. being the player is completely different from being the DM. Although the DM is a type of player, they're there to have fun. It's totally different. More responsibilities, more everything, but at the same time, I think it can be more enriching or more satisfying because you have more stuff that you're having to accomplish. So, not saying being a player is not fun. Being a player is great. All right. Bass Majerink, I hope I'm saying that right, Majerink, said, it is really helping, and next Sunday I start this campaign, so this is helpful. When is the next? And then he said, good to hear that you're all right in this difficult time, obviously talking about COVID. Yeah, COVID's still going on. Yeah. Woo! So you'd think being at home more and all that, I'd have more, but no, I don't have more time. I'm just busy. I'm like a computer guy, web guy, so I mean, my workload hasn't really slowed down, for which I'm thankful. And then I said, Bass asked this 2 months ago, said, when's the next one? And I said, I'm probably recording the next installment in a week or so. It's been at least 2 months. And it's been about 4 months since number 7 came out. So, although, again, I do cover multiple sessions per video. So I think today's video is going to cover 6 or 7 sessions. So it's almost, it's a month and a half, if not more, worth of gameplay. And then, Noah Fielding said, dude, are you still doing these? I'm just about to start running Tomb of Annihilation. These videos have been really helpful. Yep, still doing them. So, doing one right now. Yay! I don't mean that sarcastically. I'm like, yeah, I'm finally getting to it. And then Bass said, good to hear you're right in this difficult time. I think I already mentioned that. Yeah, thanks, Bass. Hope everyone's doing well out there in the COVID. And then D3A said, hey, Shane, I had to stop supporting the Patreon because money got tight with the current situation. I'm also self-employed, but I'll be back as soon as things get better. I'm still a big fan of these videos and wait for them eagerly. Of course, I said, no worries at all. I never want someone to think that they have to support the Patreon. I don't want anybody to ever think that they have to. But if you do, it's appreciated. I'm not going to complain. And like I said, if we get to a certain monthly support level, then I'll start doing, I'll commit to a certain amount per month. So, again, I don't want to beat that dead horse. So that's the viewer feedback. And now I want to get to some rules, clarification, and notes. What I like to do is handle the rules that may have come up during sessions before I get into the recap. So that way, once I get into the recap, I can just flow with the recap. So here's a little bit of rules stuff. All right, let's see what we can find here. Got all my notes and stuff here. All right, here we go. Rules. Surprise rules. So my players ran into some velociraptors, which are like 1/4 CR opponents, I think. And because of surprise, these velociraptors were wrecking them. Between the surprise round the velociraptors got and the fact that they have these pack tactics that if they're, within a certain amount of feet of each other, they get advantage and all this stuff. I mean, they were just flat wrecking the party. But talking about surprise, just thought it'd be a good time to do a recap on surprise and how that works. Got it marked in the player's handbook here somewhere. It's not the player's handbook. It's Tomb of Annihilation. Let me get the player's handbook. Always helpful to have the actual book that you're gotta look in, right? Player's handbook. Okay, so let's see if I can find these surprise rounds or surprise rules. Okay, surprise. It's right on the first page of the combat rules. Go to page 189. And it says, the DM determines who might be surprised. If neither side tries to be stealthy, they automatically notice each other. Otherwise, the DM compares the dexterity stealth checks of anyone hiding with the passive wisdom perception score of each creature on the opposing side. Any character or monster that doesn't notice that is surprised. So if you're surprised, if you as a player or your players or your monsters or whatever are surprised, they can't move or take an action on your first turn of the combat. And you can't take a reaction until the turn ends. So, and a member of a group can be surprised even if the other members aren't. So what that basically means is if you get surprised, then for the first round of combat, you basically stand there. It used to be called, I think, flat-footed, or maybe that flat-footed was an old term for a negative modifier. Maybe you didn't get your dexterity bonus to armor class or anything. But for 5e, if you're surprised, you stand there like a schmuck while the opposing forces have their way with you. And that's how it works. So you just stand there and take it. You don't get action, movement, reactions, no attacks of opportunity, nothing. Let me double check, make sure that applies to movement, but I think it does. Yeah, you can't move or take an action. An action. You can't move or take an, it doesn't matter if you have 8 actions. You can't move or take an action. And you also can't take a reaction. So that's surprise. And when a bunch of velociraptors jump out on you and everybody gets surprised, they can wreck you. And they were wrecking these characters. Let's see what other rules that I have here. Okay, invisibility and the invisibility condition. Just want to touch on that again. Invisibility is whether it's a spell or if it's the spell, then a creature a creature you touch becomes invisible to the spell ends. So anything the target is wearing or carrying is invisible as long as it is on the target's person. The spell ends if a target attacks or casts a spell. That's the only thing that ends invisibility, other than this is a concentration spell, so if it's a spell cast on you, that the caster could drop the concentration. But if you get hit or talk or whatever, that doesn't end the invisibility. What ends the invisibility is if you attack or if you cast a spell. That is what ends invisibility. So, just want to point that out because we had a situation where somebody was running while they were invisible and they got hit with like an arrow or a crossbow bolt or something, and that didn't end the invisibility. So, there we go. Let's see, any other rules stuff here? Okay, shield guardians and their control amulets. So I'm going to look that up in the monster manual. I'm going to tell you exactly what it says, and specifically we're talking about the range of the control amulet. It says, a shield guardian's solitary focus is to protect the amulet's wearer. The amulet's wearer can command the guardian to attack its enemies or to guard the wielder against attack. If an attack threatens to injure the wearer, the construct can magically absorb the blow into its own body, even at a distance. So it doesn't say in here anywhere, it talks about how to destroy the amulet or to make one, but it doesn't say anything about the range. So I'm ruling, unless I hear otherwise, that as long as that amulet is anywhere on the same plane of existence as the shield guardian, you can use it. I don't see anything else to say otherwise. You can rule differently, but that's how I'm ruling it. All right. Okay, also on the shield guardian, you can store a spell in a shield guardian, and you can give preconditions for the guardian to cast that spell. For example, our party, the wielder cast a healing spell into the some sort of healing thing, and the condition was if the amulet wielder goes to 0, the guardian automatically casts that healing spell on the wielder. And it came up somehow we were talking about the shield guardian spells and concentration, and so I'm going to refer back to the shield guardian write-up, and it says A spellcaster can store a single spell within a shield guardian, which can then cast the spell on command under specific conditions. So it reads to me like it's the shield guardian casting the spell, not the person who originally stored the spell in the shield guardian. So I guess the concentration wouldn't have anything to do with the guard, the person who has the control amulet for the guardian. It would have to do, if they were unconscious or couldn't use concentration, it wouldn't matter because it's the shield guardian that's casting the spell. So there you go. Also, what about attacking something in the same space as you? For example, swarms. A swarm, like an insect swarm or some other kind of swarm, can literally occupy your space with you. So how do you attack something that's in the same space with you? Well, looking in the rules and, kind of doing a couple of searches around the internet to see what other people were thinking. There doesn't seem to be any difference. It's just you attack it, or when it's in your space, you can just attack it. Now, there also don't seem to be any clear rules on if somebody, like you have a swarm on you, and somebody's like, I'm going to help you out, and they swing at the swarm, do they hit you? Can they hit you? And it seems like by the base rules, it's not really covered. But no pun intended, cover could potentially, if you wanted to use cover a certain way, then it could work. So let me go into the Dungeon Master's Guide. Dungeon Master's Guide. Here we go. I think I got it marked. Do I got it marked? I got it marked somewhere. La la la. Yeah, cover. Okay. Hitting cover. This is on page 272 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. When a ranged attack misses a target that has covered, you can use this optional rule to determine whether the cover was struck. First, determine whether the attack roll would have hit the protected target without the cover. If the attack roll falls within the range low enough to miss the target but high enough to strike the target, if there had been no cover, the object used for cover is struck. If a creature is providing cover for the missed creature, and the attack roll exceeds the AC of the covering creature is hit. So, what that's saying is, let's say that you're attacking somebody and they have cover, and you roll whatever, and the cover gets a +2 to their AC, right? Because they're behind cover. Well, if you miss within 2 because of the cover, that means that you specifically missed because of the cover. And so you would hit the cover. So now take that and put 2 creatures in front of each other or providing cover somehow. You could apply the exact same thing. And that's how I've done it in my game, is if you miss within the threshold of the bonus that the cover provides, then you hit the cover. So if you wanted, there's a couple of different ways that you could address another creature providing cover, or the swarm is in the same space. If you rule that the swarm is giving cover, or if you rule that your ally is giving the swarm some level of cover, then you could just do it that way. If you try to attack the swarm and you miss within the threshold, the modifier that the cover is providing, then you hit, whatever's providing cover, the person, right? I'm going to try to hit the swarm, but you're providing a little bit of cover. Oh, I missed within that range. I'm sorry, I accidentally hit you. Another way you could do it that's much simpler is if somebody attacks and you're in a swarm, or there's some creature in the same space as you, and they fumble, they hit you. I mean, that's a really smooth, quick, elegant way of handling it. So, all right, so that's it for the rules clarifications. And now I'm gonna take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback and or rules clarifications, and we're going to dig right into recapping several sessions of Tomb of Annihilation. All right, so when we left last video, episode number 7, they were at Camp Vengeance, and they went through the whole rigmarole of whether or not Undril was going to get to go with them because she was part of the Order of the Gauntlet, and we had all that role-playing and drama, and that was fun. And the next day they were going to leave. So, and you know, continue on with the adventure. So, one thing they did do, I may have mentioned in the last video, I can't remember, is they used lesser restoration on all of the acolytes. So, because you had those people that were there helping the sick and wounded, and they were exhausted, and so the party members that had lesser restoration used that to help them out, just to be helpful. So, like, where are we going to go? And the decision was, let's find that shield guardian. So, if you remember, way back at the beginning of the adventure, there was a merchant prince, the one that the lady that hired them to go on this adventure in the first place, because she's got the death curse. The merchant prince that she was staying with, which is it's like Wakanga. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, Wakanga Otamu, the guy that deals in magic and lore. In his collection, he had a tattered, water-damaged explorer's journal that was brought out of the jungle 15 years ago. It describes a wizard's explorations of various places in Chult, but not enough detail to locate them exactly on a map. The unnamed author does, however, make many mentions of his only traveling companion, a shield guardian named Vorn. If the characters befriend Wakanga, which they kind of do because they go to visit Syndra, then he's like, look, here's the journal, and he points on the map and he says, here's where it was found, and that hex that the journal was found in is the one that also has Vorn, and Vorn is an encounter, there's a whole write-up on that hex that has Vorn in it. Then he marks it for him, and he says, in the journal contains a picture of Vorn's control amulet, provides no clues to the amulet's current whereabouts. As a reward for finding and retrieving the construct and his control amulet, Wakanga offers a spell book containing 15 randomly determined spells, which you would roll a d6 to determine the level of each spell. So they accepted that way back then, and they're looking on their map, and they're like, where Vorn is somewhere, or where the spell book was found, is kind of close to Camp Vengeance, so let's just head up there. And so that's what they decided to do. So it's 5 hexes travel by land to get there, and it was during this 5 hexes they had the random encounter with the velociraptors, and we had all the fun with the surprise rounds and everything. Anyway, so they got jumped by 9 velociraptors. Everyone was surprised. The velociraptors wrecked the party, but if you remember, they still have the gladiator with them as an NPC, the guy that came with Port Nyanzaru. And the way I do NPCs as a reminder is they're always kind of there, and they may occasionally speak up or be part of discussions, or I may use them to provide information or hints, but combat-wise or encounter-wise, they never get involved unless the players say, hey, can so-and-so get involved? And then they will get involved. And the reason I do that is because if an NPC jumps in, that affects the amount of experience points. And it also takes away the sense of accomplishment from the players. But every now and then I'll have an NPC act on its own. But for the most part, especially in combat, I just don't. Now, I might say, hey, do you want so-and-so to get involved? And they'll be like, oh, yeah. Or I'll be like, no, we got it. Well, in this case, if the gladiator hadn't gotten in, it's possible that we could have had a couple of player deaths, or player character deaths. So they found Vorn eventually. And let me describe Vorn to you. The Vorn Encounter, I should say. Hello, Vorn, where are you? Oh, Vorn. Where are you? There's Vorn, page 83 on Tomb of Annihilation. So it's standing next to some rocks and ferns is an 8-foot-tall statue, humanoid in shape with bronze fists, iron joints, an adamantine breastplate, and an iron helm with slits for eyes. The rest of the statue is made of sculpted wood, reinforced with bands and rivets of adamantine. Scattered around its feet are offerings of food, feathers, colored stones, and skulls. And that's really important if they want to get the control amulet, because if they search around, they can't find the control amulet. It's just not there. The wizard who owns Vorn died from basically bad luck in an accident decades ago, and then Vorn has just stood there impassively since then. If they don't already realize it's a shield guardian, let's say they didn't get the quest from Wakanga at the beginning and they just stumbled across it, then they need an Arcana skill 10 check to realize that it's a shield guardian. If you succeed, or if you search around, you won't find the amulet, but what you will find with a DC 10 Wisdom survival check is footprints in the dirt, evidence of nomadic tribes of goblins, grungs, and vegapygmies that revere the construct as a lesser god. They trim back the jungle vines and creepers that would otherwise swallow the construct, which is one of the reasons you can find it in the first place in the jungle, and they leave offerings at its feet. The area around it for several miles is a neutral zone where these tribes allow each other to enter without triggering conflict. So if you find the Shield Guardian's control amulet, which is at Yellyark, we're about to go to Yellyark, then you can animate the construct and take control of it. And now there's consequences. If you animate the construct and walk it off, then the local goblin, grung, and pygmy tribes can get quite upset at you. They'll be automatically hostile in their encounters unless you can somehow give them treasure or convince them that Vorn wished to leave. It was Vorn's wish. So you can handle that however you want. Now, if they want the control amulet, they're going to have to follow goblin tracks to Yellyark, which is a few hexes away. So just look on the map, find Camp Vengeance, find Vorn, find Yellyark. They're all on the DM's version of the map, and it can be it's a somewhat straight path. But the problem is, how do they know to go to Yellyark? So what they did is they did some searching. They looked all around, and they found all these. They're like, we can't find the control amulet, which of course they're disappointed. But they just kept looking around, and they determined, that all those multiple humanoids, and I don't think this says this in the book, but I said to help out the players that the goblin tracks seem the most numerous. I'm pretty sure, let me check, I'm pretty sure that's not in the book. I think I just said that. Yeah, I don't see that in here. So, because they could go, let's go this way, and they go to vegapygmies, or they go that way, and it's grungs, and it's just going to be this long, protracted thing of getting them to Yellyark. So I thought the best thing to do story-wise, so that they thought, we find some tracks, we're going to follow these tracks, but also so that they're following the right tracks, was that I did mention that the goblin tracks were more numerous, and they jumped right on that. So to get to Yellyark, they followed the trail. Oh, and I also here's another thing I had going on, because at the time, they have Azaka as their guide, and Azaka is the were-tiger, but she's in human form while she's guiding them. And every now and then I'm dropping little hints that Azaka is not completely human. And one that I did here, and they never caught on. until at one point later in the adventure, she run, tigers out, and they're like, oh, but they didn't catch on. But I tried to give them a few hints, and one of them was while they were searching the area around Vorn, I had her kind of sniff and lick the dirt, like, and they're just thinking, oh, that's just some weird Chultan tracking thing. But no, it's part of because her being a were-tiger. So that was a little hint that I threw in there that they did not catch up on. Now, they kept following the trail to Yellyark. So what I did was after one hex of travel, I had to make a survival check to keep following. And it's the goblins are the biting ant goblins, which there's near their village, there's ant piles, colony, these big, huge ant pile things. So I had him make a survival check to stay on the trail, and then after 2 more hexes after that, 3 hexes total, they come to the perimeter of goblin territory, and there's like heads and skulls and that sort of thing, and Azaka says this is clearly goblin territory. So, and as they got close to Yellyark, they spotted a tripwire with passive perception. They weren't actually actively searching, but they did notice a tripwire with passive perception. The passive perception in my party, or my group's party, is really high. They have a lot of high passive perception. So, anyway, they snuck past that. And then they also, they snuck by 1 sentry because there's goblin sentries in the area surrounding Yellyark. And so they snuck by 1. He didn't see them. But the second one spotted them and ran off. I don't know if you went, Yarky, whatever, Yellyark, I don't know. He said goblin stuff and ran off, raising the alarm. So the party, it's like, oh, boopy. So they set up an ambush. We're going to wait for them. And they went through all these. One of the players in the group loves getting to, like, military tactics. And they actually spend some time in the army. And I allow a certain amount of real-world information to come in through this player because they chose Undril Silvertusk, who's part of the Order of the Gauntlet, which is a somewhat military. It's got a lot of military in the organization. So within reason, I'll say because they start coming up with tactics and all this. So every now and then I'll be like, okay, that's getting really specific and really, but for the most part, I'm cool with it. So they had this ambush, and the goblins never showed up. The guy ran off, and so they're thinking all these goblins are going to come charging into the jungle after them, and it never happened. So they cast invisibility on the rogue to scout ahead and recon. If you know how rogues go, recon is rarely ever just recon. Whereupon, as soon as he could, the rogue player decided to sneak into the village. So let's talk about the village. It's kind of an interesting layout. So if you kind of take a look there, see, yeah, you can kind of see that. You'll see that the village is kind of laid out almost like a spider's web, and there's a reason for that. There's a net, like the whole village is built on top of this net structure that's connected to this overhanging tree, so it acts like a giant spring trap. So if you look there, I don't know how well it's coming up, but it literally snaps up into a ball and then flings the ball away with everything inside of it. So let me just go. That's a launch mechanism. The bend down tree that launches the village is anchored to this point. The launch is triggered by cutting the thick vine, which has AC 15 and 15 hit points. It's vulnerable to slashing damage, etc., etc. You can read that on page 90. All right, so If you get a good look at the village in daylight and succeed on a DC 18 Wisdom Perception check, you can kind of spot the network of vines in the bent tree and recognize them as a gigantic spring trap. Goblins don't launch themselves in this contraption. It's too deadly. Anyone inside the net when the village is launched hits the ground must make a DC 15 dexterity saving throw, taking 28 in parentheses 8d6 bludgeoning damage on a failed save or half as much on a successful one. So it will literally, like they'll try to get the enemies in the village, and then the goblins will try to run outside of the village, cut the vines, and get all trapped up in that kind of net ball, and you're flung. There's this huge tree that is like kind of hanging over the village, that it's like over the village, and it's all the vines and stuff are tied to it. So pretty crazy stuff. More like gnomes or kobolds, but anyway. Yeah, to protect themselves against giant carnivores, the goblins built the important structures of the village atop a net of strong supple tree branches bound together with vines. The net is rigged to a heavy tree bent down like a giant spring. When a predator threatens to overrun the village, goblins cut the vine and the entire village is rolled into a ball and flung 1,000 yards over the jungle. The huts inside are cushioned from impact by layers of leaves and moss. Damage to the flexible structures can be repaired, and most of the village precious totems, food, basketwork, and spare weapons are saved. 40 goblins live in the village. Queen Grabstab, a goblin boss. 24 adult goblins and 15 non-combat children. So, the tribe's survival depends on getting an early warning of approaching danger, so sentries are always posted around the village. There are ponchos made of vines and leaves, which give them advantage on dexterity stealth checks while remaining perfectly still, but impose disadvantage on dexterity stealth checks when they move. The sentries also ring the village with tripwires attached to shells and skulls filled with pebbles. Characters are searched for such things while approaching the village. Notice the tripwires with a successful DC 13 Wisdom Perception check. Otherwise, they're noticed by anyone with a passive Wisdom Perception of 13 or higher. If approaching enemies are noticed by sentries or trigger a tripwire, the village goes on alert, making it impossible to sneak in. So the other thing that's important to know about this village is that there are ant hills all around the village. This particular Batiri tribe is skilled at ant husbandry, and the village is situated between 3 ant hills that are each 10 feet across at the base and stand 8 feet high. The 3 ant hills are joined together by tunnels. Damaging or destroying an ant hill causes 6 ant swarms to erupt from an underground nest. 2 swarms emerge from each hill. The ants ignore the Batiri goblins and go after anything else they detect nearby. And that's where the swarm thing came up with the rules. Is like, well, what if something is in your actual square? What do you do? You know, what do you do? How do you fight that? How do you attack it? Are there any special rules? And there really aren't, as I said, unless you add special rules to it. So now that we've got a better idea of the village, let's get back to the rogue. And rogues being rogues, or in this case, a thief. I'm going to say thief because we're about to get into some classic D&D action here. I'm just going to call him a thief. The character is a female, but the player was a male. Anyway, that sucker, he's supposed to be reconning, but he gets out there and he's like, look at that village, and I'm all invisible. So normally at this point, because one of the sentries noticed the party and ran back, you can't sneak into the village. But the rogue being invisible, I'm like, fair enough. Now they had to make some stealth checks, because even when you're invisible, you can still make noise, and the village is kind of on alert, and there's guards and stuff. So he made some stealth checks, made it in. It said the rogue made a series of stealth checks, made it into the queen's hut, and it made it to the queen's hut by pure chance, really, because it's probably the more interesting structure in the entire village, other than that big spring trap. And it just happened to be the structure that was closest to the player. So snuck in there, made it past the guards. The Queen's Hut has some guards. I'll explain it here in a second. He failed one outside stealth check, but the guards couldn't really draw a bead on him. So the rest of his stuff was successful, and he made it in. Now, let me tell you about the Queen's Hut. And it's number 3 on the map. The Queen's Hut, you may be able to hear the cicadas out there. I love that noise. I've grown up with that noise. I love that noise. Anyway, the Queen's Hut is no larger than the others, but 2 goblins always stand guard outside. So those are the ones that he had to get past. Not to mention the perimeter guards. Queen Grabstab, who is a goblin boss, and 4 more goblins, her adult children and attendants, are inside bickering with one another over matters that concern only them. One of the Queen's attendants proudly wears the key to the wooden cage, Area 4, on a loop of rope around its neck. So Area 4 is a wooden cage where the goblins keep their prisoners. But at this point, there were I didn't put any prisoners on there, and none of the party had been taken prisoners, so the wooden cage was empty. Now, the Queen wears a bronze and adamantine medallion that has the word Vorn etched on it. This is the control amulet for the Shield Guardian. See page 83. We've already talked about that. None of the goblins have any notion that the amulet is related to the object they venerate as a minor deity, even though it says Vorn on it. They don't know its name is Vorn, right? But she's wearing it as a proud piece of jewelry. I'm a high muckety muck. So let's get back to the rogue. So the rogue gets in there, makes it past the guards, makes it past the Queen's children and attendants, and then sees that and is like, I know what that is, because they've all seen the drawing in the journal that Wakanga gave them, that we talked about earlier. That was the first hint for the Shield Guardian anyway in its location. So the rogue is like, that is the control amulet. And rogue being a rogue, thief being a thief, Invisible is like, I wonder if I can get that amulet off the Queen's neck. So again, rogues being rogues, and this is wonderful D&D moments for me. It's such a classic pure D&D moment. Whether it goes good or bad, this is going to be fun. So I set a DC of 20 to literally ease this thing off of the Queen without anybody noticing. And the rogue did it. I don't know if they rolled exactly a 20 or they rolled over a 20, but they did it. So I let them get the amulet, which was such a great classic D&D moment. Snuck in, invisible, slipped it right off the big boss. Now, it's a good thing to remember at this point that on a skill check or an ability check, fumbles and crits don't apply. By the book. Now, you can house rule it however you want, but rules as written. Then you can roll a skill check or an ability check or a DC or whatever that's not combat related. And if you get a 20, it's not an automatic success. If you get a fumble, it's not an automatic failure. So that's a lot. A lot of people think, oh, I rolled a 20, I automatically did, or I rolled a 1, I automatically failed. Remember, for skill checks and ability checks and that sort of thing, saving throws, I don't believe that counts. Only in combat. But all that being said, I set the DC at 20, which is a very hard DC, and they pulled it off. So, which was great. Now, it would have been also a lot of fun if they would have failed it, and the chaos broke out from there. But anyway, so got the amulet, did some more stealth checks, and was almost out of the village when they failed another stealth check, and a couple of perimeter guards heard the noise but didn't see what was going on and started shooting in that direction. And the rogue ran and got hit a couple of times just because they were shooting in that direction with disadvantage. I'm guessing it was bows. I don't think it was crossbows. But anyway, the guards are shooting. They know, because they're already on alert. They know something's up. So the rogue makes the tree line and then turns around and decides to start firing, which ends the invisibility. Because like we talked about earlier, the two conditions, or the two things that can end invisibility, are one, casting a spell, or two, attacking. So being hit didn't end invisibility, but they turned around and started shooting. Now, the queen is, by this point, the alarm goes up. The queen knows something's going on. She's yelling, "Blasphemy! Kill them!" Blah, blah. And even though she doesn't know what the amulet means with Vorn on it, I just loved the idea of, she's like, "Blasphemy! Vorn! Vorn!" And she's just upset and appealing to this shield guardian they venerate as a minor deity, and is just really mad. Like, not just mad that, somebody sneaked around their village, but her amulet's gone, and she feels violated on multiple levels. So she's screaming that. Two goblins are charging towards the tree line after the rogue, who has now revealed themselves by shooting back. And the main party is about 100 feet back, not sure what's going on. They're still sort of waiting to get the recon intelligence. They're still sort of set up for an ambush. And as a matter of fact, one of the players has set out a bear trap, which is going to come into play in a moment. But they hear the commotion, and they hear the queen shouting. So at the beginning of the next session, and that was the end of a session, which is a really fun place to end it. At the beginning of the next session, the rogue's character is just at the tree line and firing back, and the goblins are running at him, firing at him, and the other goblins in the village are starting to get aware and mobilized. And at this point, and I want to make a point here, because this is the kind of thing that, as a DM, you have to kind of walk a line on. And the player tells me, the one that has stolen the amulet from the queen, says, "Oh, I'm now summoning the shield guardian." Now, let's be clear, the shield guardian is not going to make the fight. It's days away. It's got to lumber towards, whoever's calling it. And, as we've already established, my ruling on this is that as long as the shield guardian and amulet are on the same plane of existence, you could call it to you, because it wasn't very well defined in the monster manual. But it would still take days for the shield guardian to make it here. So it's not going to affect this fight. However, there's a principle here with the player that I wanted to kind of work through. And the player tells me, "I am now summoning the shield guardian." I'm like, "You are? How are you sure you know how to use that amulet?" And they said, "Oh, yeah. During all the travel, I've been talking to this other player." And the other player's like, "Huh?" And to learn how to use the shield guardian, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, "Well, this is the first I've heard of it. And, you haven't told me any downtime activity. Neither player has told me about any of this." And so I said, "No, that hasn't happened. You've got to let me know somewhat in advance to just spring that on me." Now, because you're kind of retconning, like, "Well, I'm just going to write this in retroactively that I've been doing all this." So there might be times that I allow something like that if it makes a lot of sense, but this time it didn't. It just felt sort of cut and pasted in, because that's what the player wanted right then. So I said no. So I think that's a good principle. Yeah, there's things, say yes to the players and make the game fun, but there's also just players, I don't know, just springing stuff out there because it sounds good and gives them an advantage, and doesn't make any narrative sense. So I didn't say no, I said no. But anyway, once the rogue had turned around at the tree line and had shot a couple of times, they turned back around and booked for where the party was with the ambush. And they, somebody said that bear trap. I gave them a DC to notice that they failed, and they stepped right in that bear trap and took damage. And I drew like a little diagram here I know it's kind of hard to see of how the party was laid out, and the rogue coming in. There's a little arrow there and some trees and all that, and hitting the bear trap. And that was a fun little moment for me as a DM. Because if you set a bear trap, it can work against your party members if they don't know about it. So like I said, and it was set. They specifically said it was set right in front of the party, so anybody coming at the party would hit it. Bam. And so I gave it a DC, and they failed the DC and stepped right into it. So, and they've stepped right into it in more ways than one. So I also wanted to, for this fight that's coming up, I wanted to make it a fun fight, and have the goblins think a little bit more creatively. And I'm not just going to have them swarm in. Another thing, one of the reasons I was showing you this stuff, my little diagrams and notes and whatnot, I write these notes a lot of times while an adventure is going on, or a session, or just immediately after. One, to help me remember for future sessions, but also for these videos. But you don't have to get fancy. I came up with that just on the spot. As long as the players are having a good time, you don't have to. There's nothing wrong with preparing ahead of time. And I know there's personalities and DMs that they're like, I'm gonna prepare 3 hours for every hour of game time, or whatever, and that's fine. But I just don't roll that way. I have a general idea of what'll happen, and I just whip it up. And it 9 times out of 10, 99%, whatever, it works out just fine. So as long as your players are having fun, cool. So what I'm saying is be willing to just, okay, well, we'll make that happen. Write up some quick notes and just keep charging right ahead, and it'll almost always work out fine. Now, the 2 goblins that were chasing the rogue, they ended up splitting up, and they were stealthing to go further in, and they found the group, and we're kind of watching the group. And what I did was I kept moving them and rolling stealth, and then the PCs kept trying to perceive to see if any goblins were coming, and I split it up into 2 zones. And so it was almost like Goblin Battleship. Like, I'm going to try to perceive this way, and I'm going to try to perceive that way, and I had a goblin in each zone, rolling stealth and moving, and so, Goblin Battleship. Why not, right? So, and what I decided was, if at least one of these 2 goblins made it back to the tree line, the remaining goblins would attack with good tactics, because they had a recon. They knew they had recon. They knew where the group was, how the group was set up, and all that. So they would bring that back to the main force of goblins. One goblin was caught and defeated, but one got away. So that led me to have the main goblin force have better tactics. So, which was one queen and 24 adults were coming in three different groups. One group on one side, another group on another side, and another group from behind. So the only area zone that didn't have goblins coming directly at the players was right in front of them. And another thing that the queen did for smart tactics, she sent 5 goblins in to attack, to kind of probe the players, to see how the players would react. So the players, the 5 goblins came in, they attacked and defeated those goblins, and I guess in their minds they're thinking, well, that's going to be it, because I specifically made a note that they just sort of talk and blah, blah, blah. They didn't, after the fight, they didn't regroup, they didn't fortify, they didn't do anything like that. And then this big attack came in from 3 different directions with all the remaining goblins. So the queen and 19 goblins just, boom, came at them from 3 different directions with a big attack. And they ended up, they defeated 11 goblins, they defeated the queen, and they put 6 goblins to sleep before the fight ended. And when the queen, after the queen was defeated, the goblins surrendered and the party let them go. They're like, all right, go. So that's kind of how that ended. But I thought that was interesting because I was curious how the players would react too. Like I said, that probe in. So sometimes I forget to have the monsters act intelligently, but I enjoyed how this fight went. Especially, you had the 2 goblins sneaking in to reconnoiter, and all that. Then you had 5 go in just to charge in, just to see what the players would do, and then they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're done, and then the big fight came in. So that was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed doing that. So, all right. So after all that, they wanted to go back to the Shield Guardian, and I just hand waved the travel, because what I've started doing, and it was the first time that I've hand waved. I just didn't do any random checks or anything. I just said, okay, you make it back. Because a lot of what I'm doing with this, if they're recovering ground they've already covered, a lot of times I'm just saying, okay, it's this much travel. Because you want to strike a balance between making the point that travel is dangerous and has encounters. It can also just be fun and beautiful. But you don't want it to be a constant slog. So kind of find that balance. I encourage you to do that. So the rogue player ended up taking the Shield Guardian. Ultimately, the party as a whole, they want to see if the Merchant Prince's spellbook he's willing to give them is worth trading for. They may just want to keep this, the Shield Guardian. They cast Healing Word into the Guardian, and they set a predefined condition to if the wearer drops to 0 hit points. So I think what they did is, for a moment, they let somebody that could cast it into the Guardian, and then they changed ownership to the Rogue, and I guess the spell just stayed in there. If I remember right now, to the Abyss, they can be lent a Shield Guardian that has spells in it. So I don't think the spells are lost. I'd have to go double check that, but I didn't make the spell get lost in between transition. And at that point, they decided to... Azaka, their guide, has been asking to go to Firefinger. She said, I will guide you for free if you will help me recover my home of Firefinger, my family home. And they said, yeah, we'll help you do that. So it's about 120 miles east. So they're going to Firefinger with Azaka to honor that request. And again, I hand-waved the travel from Vorn back to Camp Righteous, which was another 4 days travel. Because, like I said, they've done that. They've just done that. The point's been made. One thing I did, though, is I asked them to describe how they crossed the river, just as a creativity exercise. I didn't have any roles. I didn't have any. I just described to me how you're crossing the river, and they built a raft, and they had Vorn walk across the bottom of the river. So there you go. And evidently, I guess the swarm rules and all that wasn't because of the ants. They had a random encounter with a centipede swarm. That's what I've written here. Because after Camp Righteous, I went back to daily travel and encounters. So they weren't going to Camp Righteous. It was just a waypoint. They knew where Camp Righteous was. So we'll hit Camp Righteous, and then from there we'll go to Firefinger. Not Camp Vengeance. They crossed the river and went back to Camp Righteous. So there you go. That is it for this session. Thank you so much for watching and listening and for all your support. And, we'll be back. They're on their way to Firefinger with a were-tiger that they don't know is a were-tiger. Where is the were-tiger? Well, it's right among you, if you only knew. Anyway, thanks so much for watching Shane Plays, and we will catch you next time as we continue on the adventure that is Tomb of Annihilation.